The total number of votes cast in favour of Remain was 51,930. The total number of votes cast in favour of Leave was 82,000.
Country to join the common market.
Well, it's been 2 years now, or close to it, since the British people voted to leave the European Union, at a margin of 52 to 48%. That is a difference of over 1 million votes. I would say that's pretty comprehensive. But since then, debate has raged over what our destination should look like outside the European Union, and quite rightly so. But one idea being floated by the political elite is to leave the European Union, but stay in its single market. Let me make this clear. Anyone interested in upholding the sovereignty and democracy of Great Britain, whether you voted Remain or Leave, should vehemently oppose this. We cannot let this, what is a blatant betrayal of a democratic vote, pass us by. The position to remain in the single market is fairly common, sadly. Those of you that follow British politics will know that a large number of Labour MPs have been calling for it for quite a long time. These include the oh-so-great Chuka Umunna.
It's vital that we remain members of the single market, if that is possible in these negotiations.
And of course the very level-headed Chris, Brexit will cause war, Bryant.
Refugees and ethnic minorities. I fear the turn this world is taking towards narrow nationalism, protectionism and demagoguery. Distrust of those who are different from us can all too often, not always, but all too often, turn to hatred of foreigners, and that way lies the trail to war.
Now, normally that would be all you need to know about this position, but sadly it isn't just coming from the virtue-signalling lefties over at Labour. We'd expect it from them. But our very own Chancellor, Philip Hammond, is constantly coming out in the press, defying government policy. How he hasn't been fired, I don't know. Saying how we're going to face a plague of frogs, how we're going to have our firstborn children drop dead in the street if we leave, etc., etc. We're used to it by now. And reportedly, some government drafts have been leaked, saying that this sort of Norway model, where we stay in the single market, is a real possibility, and it's something that they might actually go for. This needs to be put to sleep. We cannot let this happen, and let me explain why. Now, when we look at survey and research data, and just from personal experience as well, people voted Leave based on two primary reasons, and I'm fairly certain that any Leave voter will tell you this. First was immigration. You know, that hatred of all things foreign that Chris Bryant talked about. People voted to Leave to end freedom of movement within the EU. People sometimes misunderstand this as they wanted some sort of reform or tweaks to the system. No, they wanted a complete end to freedom of movement. They wanted a say over who came into their country. Second was democracy, and in many ways it's actually linked to the first one. They wanted an end to EU law having primacy over British law. An end to EU institutions having say over the people we elect. Those were the two primary reasons, and there were some secondary reasons, of course, like the budget contributions, but to be honest, I found it quite hard to find anyone who voted based upon that, because if they were that concerned about the economy, then admittedly they probably did vote Remain. But this is the infuriating thing. It takes a short Google search, and maybe a quick browse through the Wikipedia article for European Single Market, and within the first 2 minutes of reading, you will find that membership is completely contradictory to the reasons that people voted Leave. You cannot be a member of the single market and still respect the vote of the referendum. First off, one of the 4 freedoms of the European single market, things which are guaranteed and unchangeable amongst its members, is freedom of movement. One of the, if not the most important issues for Leave voters in the referendum, and you're going to say that they have to accept freedom of movement. Second, members of the single market have to accept at least some, if not all, EU laws and regulations. and they must be enforced by the European Court of Justice. As that magnificent wank-stain of a newspaper, The Independent, puts it, the single market is governed by reams of legislation that aims to harmonise rules on everything from maximum working hours to tackling climate change. So European law would still have primacy over British law. Another betrayal.
The truth is that if we still have our laws determined by the European Court of Justice, then our Parliament is no longer able to make all our laws, and the votes of the British people do not count because our laws are made and interpreted by a foreign court.
We're under the ECJ now and we make
We
laws.
are under the ECJ now and we voted to leave.
Nonsense.
We cannot allow our law to be overturned by Brussels if we have left the European Union. It is...
But even if we take the secondary issue of these budgetary contributions, that not many people voted on, I'm sure, but it still is an issue, even that cannot be reconciled with membership of the single market. Members of the single market have to contribute to the budget, as is the case with Norway and Switzerland. The mental gymnastics these people use to say they're respecting the referendum whilst advocating this sort of position are quite remarkable. Either they say something along the lines of, "Those poor dears didn't really know what they were voting for, so it's a good thing I'm here to stop them from doing something stupid," or they come along the lines of, "It's really far too damaging to leave."
That much of those service industries that you were rightly talking about will suffer considerably if we don't get the right deal for Britain. I want us to be a member of that single market.
To the first point, I mean, that is just unbelievably patronising to say that Brexit voters didn't know what they were voting for. I've already explained how Brexit voters voted on a clear statement of interest. They wanted to end freedom of movement and they wanted their own sovereignty. That is a clear mandate to leave the single market because those two things are incompatible with membership. To the second point, let's accept that there will be some economic damage. I think it's rather disputable, but we'll accept it to be helpful. How damaging does leaving the single market have to be for it to be worth destroying the faith of an entire country, not just Leave voters, of an entire country in the power of their own vote? Leave voters and Remain voters will look at this betrayal and think, what's the point in voting? You know, when you talk to someone who's apathetic, who doesn't really care about politics, and you ask them why they don't have an interest or why they don't vote, one of the answers they often give is because it doesn't really make a difference. You know, they're all the same, etc., etc. It's people like this saying that we should do our best to avoid making these changes that actually give weight to that assertion. I would contest that an economic impact would have to be catastrophic to be worth that sort of damage to people's faith in democracy. And do you really think it's going to be that catastrophic? Do you really think it's going to be this sort of apocalyptic moment where suddenly all economic activity stops in Britain? That is lunacy. The single market option represents the status quo. If we stay in the single market, we would have left the European Union in name alone. No one voted for that, and if you think anyone did, you must be daft. I have more respect for the positions of people like Tony Blair, who want a second referendum, because at least they are honest. They aren't trying to keep us in the EU by stealth. The only reason they push this is because they regret the vote, and this is the most politically viable option there is to try and subvert the will of the people. We cannot let this be politically viable. We must denounce it for the dishonest, undemocratic crap that it really is. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the first video of this channel. Please leave a comment with your thoughts or perhaps some feedback. I would really like to nail the format of these videos, so tell me what I did right, what I did wrong, or send me a death threat perhaps. Be in touch.